Sirens pierces the quiet suburban night. Emergency lights flash against bedroom windows as neighbors peer through their curtains, watching paramedics rush a small figure on a stretcher into the back of an ambulance. This isn't just any emergency call. This is 12-year-old Marcus Thompson, and his body is shutting down. Just hours earlier, he was dancing at his middle school formal, his face glowing with the innocent joy that comes with wearing your first real suit and feeling grown up for one magical evening. But now, as doctors frantically work to stabilize him in the emergency room, they're facing symptoms that don't make sense for a healthy 7th grader. His fever spikes to dangerous levels, his lymph nodes are swollen, and mysterious rashes cover his young body. The medical team searches desperately for answers, running test after test, but what they discover isn't just an illness. It's evidence of a betrayal so profound, so unthinkable, that it began inside his own home, perpetrated by the one person who was supposed to protect him after his mother's death 3 years earlier. How could a night of celebration, a rite of passage that should have been filled with awkward dancing and nervous laughter, turn into a death sentence? How could the woman who tucked him into bed each night, who made his favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings, who called herself his bonus mom, become the architect of his destruction? Tonight, we uncover the most disturbing family betrayal ever documented in modern American courts. 3 questions will haunt you throughout this story. Who betrayed Marcus Thompson, and why did they choose to destroy an innocent child's life? What twisted secret festered inside a seemingly perfect suburban family? And how could a stepmother, entrusted with a grieving child's welfare, instead become his would-be executioner? Stay with us, because this case will challenge everything you thought you knew about the people we trust most. This is a story about the monsters who don't lurk in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. These are the monsters who sit at our dinner tables, who know exactly how we like our coffee, who hold our hands when we're scared. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how this nightmare began, we need to go back 3 years to when David Thompson first brought Rebecca Collins into his son's life. David was a devoted single father, working double shifts at the automotive plant to provide for Marcus after losing his wife Sarah to cancer. The grief had been overwhelming for both father and son, but David was determined to rebuild their shattered world. Marcus was everything you'd expect from a bright 11-year-old boy. He collected baseball cards, built elaborate Lego structures that covered his bedroom floor, and had an infectious laugh that could fill their entire house. His teachers consistently praised his curiosity and kindness, noting how he always helped classmates who struggled with math, his strongest subject. Despite the tragedy of losing his mother, Marcus maintained an optimistic outlook that impressed everyone who knew him. When David met Rebecca at a local coffee shop, it seemed like divine intervention. She was a registered nurse, recently divorced, with a gentle demeanor that immediately put Marcus at ease. Rebecca had shoulder-length auburn hair and kind eyes that seemed to genuinely light up when she talked to Marcus about his science projects or baseball card collection. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends, always posting pictures of the rescued dogs she helped care for on her social media accounts. Their courtship was refreshingly normal. Rebecca would join them for Marcus's Little League games, cheering louder than any biological parent. She helped with homework, patiently explaining algebraic concepts until they clicked in Marcus's young mind. When David worked late shifts, she insisted on staying with Marcus, ensuring he never felt abandoned or alone. Neighbors often commented on what a perfect family they made, how lucky David was to find someone who loved his son as much as she seemed to. The wedding 18 months later was a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard. Marcus served as ring-bearer, beaming with pride as he watched his father marry the woman who had become such an important part of their healing process. Rebecca legally adopted Marcus 6 months after the marriage, tears streaming down her face as she promised to love and protect him as her own child. She changed his emergency contact information at school, added him to her health insurance, and hung a World's Greatest Bonus Mom coffee mug prominently in their kitchen, But families, like people, often hide their darkest truths behind the most beautiful facades. Rebecca's nursing background meant she understood medical terminology, treatment protocols, and how diseases spread through the human body. She knew exactly which symptoms doctors would look for, which tests would reveal what information, and how long certain conditions could remain undetected. This knowledge, combined with access to medical supplies through her work at St. Mary's Regional Hospital, created opportunities that most people would never have. The first signs that something was amiss came in subtle forms that David, exhausted from work and grateful for Rebecca's presence, didn't recognize as warning signals. Rebecca began having long, private conversations with Marcus about growing up and special relationships between people who care about each other. She convinced him these talks were normal, part of helping him navigate adolescence without his biological mother's guidance. She bought him expensive gifts that David couldn't afford, creating a sense of dependency and special connection. Marcus, desperate for maternal affection and approval, didn't question why Rebecca insisted their conversations remain private. He didn't understand why she sometimes looked at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, or why her hugs lasted longer than they should have. At 12 years old, he lacked the emotional vocabulary to articulate the confusion he felt, the sense that something important was changing in ways he couldn't comprehend. The night that would change everything started with such innocent excitement. Marcus spent an hour in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to get his hair to cooperate with the gel Rebecca had bought him for the occasion. His navy blue suit, the first real suit he'd ever owned, hung perfectly thanks to Rebecca's careful alterations. She had insisted on taking him shopping, spending more money than David thought necessary, but her enthusiasm was infectious. "You look so handsome," Rebecca said, adjusting his tie for the third time as David snapped pictures. "All the girls are going to want to dance with you." Marcus blushed, still at that age where the attention felt both thrilling and mortifying. The middle school formal was a big deal in their small town, a tradition that marked the transition from childhood to adolescence. David had planned to drive Marcus to the dance, but Rebecca insisted she would handle pickup duty. "You work so hard during the week," she told her husband. "Let me take care of our boy tonight." The word "our" still made David's heart warm. After years of carrying the parenting load alone, having someone who genuinely cared about Marcus felt like a gift he'd never expected to receive. The dance itself was everything Marcus had hoped it would be. He awkwardly slow-danced with Emma Patterson, his longtime crush, and even attempted some of the more complicated moves his friends had been practicing for weeks. The gymnasium had been transformed with twinkling lights and streamers, and the DJ played all the songs the 7th graders had requested. Marcus felt grown up and confident, surrounded by friends and teachers who celebrated this milestone in their young lives. When Rebecca arrived for pickup at 9:30 p.m., Marcus was still buzzing with excitement, eager to share every detail of his evening. But instead of driving straight home, Rebecca suggested they take a detour to Clearwater Lake, about 15 minutes outside of town. "I thought we could talk about the dance," she said. "Sometimes it's nice to process big moments like this in a peaceful setting." Marcus didn't think anything was strange about the suggestion. Rebecca often took him to quiet places for their talks, and he'd grown accustomed to her belief that important conversations required special settings. Clearwater Lake was beautiful at night, with moonlight reflecting off the still water and the distant sound of owls calling to each other through the trees. What happened next at that lake would haunt investigators, medical professionals, and everyone who heard this story. The exact details of that evening remain sealed in court records, protected by laws designed to shield young victims from further trauma. But what we know is this: Rebecca Thompson, the woman who had promised to protect Marcus, crossed a line that no parent, step-parent, or caregiver should ever cross. The drive home was different. Marcus sat quietly in the passenger seat, confused by what had occurred and struggling to process emotions he didn't understand. Rebecca spoke softly, reassuring him that what happened was special and just between them, using language that made him feel both important and frightened. She reminded him how much she loved him, how their family worked because they trusted each other with secrets. That night, Rebecca crossed a line no parent ever should, and the consequences would be deadly. If you're still with us, drop "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's following every twist of this case. The first symptoms appeared 3 weeks after the formal. Marcus woke up with what seemed like a routine fever, the kind that sends parents to the medicine cabinet for children's Tylenol and a day home from school. But Rebecca, with her medical background, knew this was no ordinary illness. She monitored his temperature obsessively, taking detailed notes that she claimed were necessary for tracking his recovery. When the fever persisted and was joined by swollen lymph nodes in his neck, Rebecca suggested they wait before seeing a doctor. "These viral infections need time to run their course," she told David. "Too many parents rush to urgent care and just waste money on antibiotics that won't help." Her confidence in medical matters had always impressed David, who trusted her nursing expertise implicitly. But Marcus's condition worsened. The fever spiked to 102 degrees. He developed a persistent rash across his chest and arms, and his energy disappeared completely. He stopped eating Rebecca's carefully prepared meals, preferring to lie in bed with the curtains drawn. His friends called to check on him, but he seemed too exhausted to maintain conversations that would normally energize him. Rebecca became increasingly controlling about Marcus's medical care. She insisted on being present for any doctor visits, speaking for him when physicians asked direct questions about his symptoms. She provided detailed timelines of his illness, complete with temperature logs and symptom descriptions that painted a picture of a typical viral infection. Most doctors, impressed by her thoroughness and medical vocabulary, didn't dig deeper into potential causes. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, their family physician, initially diagnosed Marcus with a viral syndrome, possibly mononucleosis given his age and symptoms. She recommended rest, fluids, and follow-up appointments to monitor his recovery. But when Marcus didn't improve after 2 weeks, she began asking more pointed questions about potential exposure sources. Had he been around sick classmates? Had the family traveled recently? Were there any other risk factors she should consider? Rebecca had answers for everything. She provided lists of classmates who had been ill, detailed accounts of their recent activities, and medical histories that seemed to explain Marcus's prolonged recovery. She was so thorough, so professional in her responses, that Dr. Martinez didn't initially suspect she might be the source of her stepson's illness rather than his advocate. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus's closest friend, Tyler Chen, had noticed the dramatic change in his buddy's behavior and energy levels. Tyler's mother, Linda, was a pediatric nurse at the children's hospital downtown. When Tyler described Marcus's symptoms and prolonged illness, something triggered Linda's professional instincts. Linda had seen cases of pediatric HIV infection during her 15-year career, and Marcus's symptom presentation was raising red flags she couldn't ignore. The persistent fever, swollen lymph nodes, fatigue, and rashes were consistent with acute HIV infection, particularly in the absence of other obvious causes. She knew it was a sensitive topic, especially involving a child, but her clinical experience convinced her that Marcus needed comprehensive testing beyond what a typical viral syndrome would warrant. Linda approached David directly, choosing her words carefully to avoid alarming him unnecessarily. She suggested that given Marcus's prolonged illness and Rebecca's medical background, perhaps they should consider more extensive blood work to rule out conditions that might not have been initially considered. She recommended Dr. Sarah Kim, an infectious disease specialist who worked with pediatric patients. David was initially resistant. Rebecca had assured him that Marcus was recovering normally, and he didn't want to subject his son to additional medical procedures unless absolutely necessary. But Linda's gentle persistence, combined with Marcus's continued decline, eventually convinced him to seek a second opinion. Dr. Kim took one look at Marcus's symptoms and ordered a comprehensive blood panel that included HIV testing. Rebecca objected strenuously, arguing that such testing was unnecessary for a child with no risk factors. She became increasingly agitated as Dr. Kim explained the rationale for testing, eventually leaving the examination room claiming she needed to make urgent phone calls related to her work schedule. The results came back 3 days later, and they changed everything. Marcus tested positive for HIV-1, with a viral load indicating recent infection. Dr. Kim immediately contacted Child Protective Services and local law enforcement, as protocol required when a minor tested positive for a sexually transmitted infection. Detective Maria Santos had worked dozens of child abuse cases during her 12 years with the police department, but something about Marcus's case felt different from the beginning. The medical evidence was clear. Marcus had been infected with HIV through sexual contact. But identifying the source and circumstances would require careful investigation that balanced the need for justice with protection of a traumatized child. The initial interviews with Marcus were conducted by specially trained child advocates in a comfortable, non-threatening environment. Marcus was confused and frightened, struggling to understand why police officers and social workers were asking him difficult questions about private matters. He had been conditioned by Rebecca to view their special relationship as normal and loving, making it difficult for him to recognize the abuse he had experienced. Rebecca's behavior during the investigation became increasingly erratic. She hired an expensive defense attorney before anyone had formally accused her of wrongdoing. She provided law enforcement with detailed medical records, claiming she had been monitoring Marcus for signs of illness because she suspected he might have been exposed to HIV through experimentation with other children at school. But detectives uncovered a medical record that blew the case wide open. The discovery that changed everything came from Rebecca's own medical records, subpoenaed as part of the routine investigation into Marcus's HIV infection. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, Rebecca's personal physician, had documented a positive HIV test from 18 months earlier, 6 months before Rebecca married David and began the adoption process for Marcus. The timeline was devastating in its clarity. Rebecca had known she was HIV positive before she ever became Marcus's legal guardian. She had undergone the standard testing and counseling that accompanied an HIV diagnosis, receiving detailed information about transmission prevention, treatment options, and the legal obligations regarding disclosure to sexual partners. Her medical records showed she had been prescribed antiretroviral medications, but had discontinued them against medical advice after only 2 months. Dr. Gonzalez's notes revealed even more disturbing information. Rebecca had asked specific questions about HIV transmission timelines, how long the virus could remain undetectable in blood tests, and what symptoms would appear in newly infected individuals. She had claimed these questions were related to her nursing duties, but the detailed nature of her inquiries had concerned Dr. Gonzalez enough to document them thoroughly. The investigation team, led by Detective Santos, began piecing together a timeline that revealed the calculated nature of Rebecca's actions. She had pursued a relationship with David while knowing she carried a deadly virus. She had legally adopted Marcus while concealing information that would have prevented the adoption. Most horrifically, she had used her medical knowledge and trusted position to infect a child who viewed her as a mother figure. Phone records revealed that Rebecca had been researching HIV transmission and pediatric infections online for months before Marcus's formal dance. Her browser history showed visits to medical websites, legal forums discussing HIV criminalization laws, and even research into how long HIV could remain undetected in children. The digital evidence painted a picture of someone who had been planning Marcus's infection with methodical precision. Marcus's viral load and genetic sequencing confirmed that his HIV strain was genetically identical to Rebecca's, providing definitive proof of transmission between them. The medical evidence was so overwhelming that even Rebecca's high-priced legal team couldn't dispute the connection. The only remaining question was whether the transmission had been intentional or the result of criminal negligence. The motive remained puzzling to investigators and prosecutors. Why would Rebecca deliberately infect a child she claimed to love? Psychological evaluations revealed a complex personality disorder characterized by manipulation, narcissism, and a need for control that manifested in destroying the things she claimed to cherish most. Dr. Emily Watson, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that Rebecca exhibited classic signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, deriving satisfaction from creating medical crises she could then manage and control. But there was another layer to Rebecca's motivation that emerged through careful investigation of her background. Her previous marriage had ended when her ex-husband discovered she had been having an affair with a teenage family member. She had lost custody of her biological daughter after allegations of inappropriate behavior that had never been proven, but had destroyed her relationship with her own child. David Thompson's world collapsed as the full scope of Rebecca's deception became clear. The woman he had trusted with his son's life, the woman he had believed was helping them heal from Sarah's death, had instead been orchestrating a tragedy that would haunt them forever. He filed for emergency divorce, removed Rebecca from all parental rights, and began the painful process of supporting Marcus through both physical and psychological treatment. The community that had once celebrated Rebecca as the perfect stepmother now grappled with the reality that they had welcomed a predator into their midst. Neighbors who had admired her dedication to Marcus now realized they had witnessed the grooming process that preceded his abuse. Teachers who had praised her involvement in Marcus's education understood they had been manipulated by someone who viewed their trust as a tool for accessing her victim. Child Protective Services launched a comprehensive review of their adoption and guardianship procedures, acknowledging that their screening process had failed to identify warning signs that might have protected Marcus. The case sparked legislative discussions about mandatory HIV testing for prospective guardians and adoptive parents, though such measures remain controversial and legally complex. Rebecca was arrested on charges of first-degree assault, child sexual abuse, and intentional transmission of HIV. The prosecutors, led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Rodriguez, argued that her actions constituted attempted murder, given the potentially fatal nature of HIV infection in an untreated child. They presented evidence of premeditation, including her research into transmission methods and her deliberate concealment of her own HIV status. The trial of Rebecca Thompson became one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the state's history. Media attention focused not just on the shocking nature of the crimes, but on the broader questions about trust, family structure, and the protection of vulnerable children in modern society. The courtroom was packed daily with reporters, legal observers, and community members struggling to understand how such evil could disguise itself as love. Rebecca's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney James Harrison, attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstance who had genuinely loved Marcus and never intended to harm him. They argued that the HIV transmission had been accidental, the result of innocent physical contact during routine caregiving activities. They painted a picture of a devoted stepmother whose only crime was failing to disclose her HIV status out of fear of losing her new family. The defense's strategy crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence. The prosecution presented Rebecca's internet search history, showing months of research into HIV transmission methods and pediatric infection timelines. They demonstrated that her medical knowledge made accidental transmission virtually impossible, given the specific circumstances required for HIV infection to occur between an adult and child. Dr. Michael Stevens, an expert witness in HIV transmission, testified that the viral loads and transmission patterns in Marcus's case were consistent only with sexual contact, not the accidental exposure scenarios suggested by the defense. His testimony was clinical but devastating, providing medical evidence that supported the prosecution's argument about intentional infection. Perhaps most damaging to Rebecca's case was her own behavior during the investigation and trial. She showed no genuine remorse for Marcus's suffering, instead focusing on her own victimization by a legal system she claimed didn't understand the complexities of her situation. She continued to manipulate facts, contradict her previous statements, and attempt to blame Marcus himself for misunderstanding their special relationship. Marcus, now 13 and undergoing intensive HIV treatment, testified via closed-circuit television to protect his privacy and emotional well-being. His testimony was heartbreaking in its innocence and confusion. He still struggled to understand why the woman he had trusted as a mother had chosen to hurt him so deliberately. His words, delivered in a voice that was still clearly that of a child, provided the emotional impact that medical evidence alone could not convey. The prosecution's closing argument focused not just on Rebecca's actions, but on the broader betrayal she had perpetrated against every person who had trusted her with Marcus's welfare. Assistant District Attorney Rodriguez reminded the jury that child abuse often comes from those closest to victims, wrapped in expressions of love and care that mask calculated cruelty. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Rebecca Thompson was convicted of first-degree assault, child sexual abuse, and intentional transmission of HIV, with aggravating factors that increased her potential sentence significantly. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, noted that the case represented one of the most serious breaches of trust she had encountered in 30 years on the bench. At sentencing, Rebecca finally broke her composed facade, pleading for mercy and claiming she had never intended to harm Marcus. But her words rang hollow after months of denying responsibility and attempting to blame her victim. Judge Williams sentenced Rebecca to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole, noting that her actions had destroyed not just Marcus's childhood, but potentially his entire future. The community impact extended far beyond the courtroom. Parents throughout the region began questioning their assumptions about the people they allowed into their children's lives. Schools and youth organizations implemented additional background check procedures, though experts acknowledged that no screening process could have identified Rebecca's potential for harm before she acted on it. Do you think justice was truly served in this case? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. David Thompson faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding his relationship with Marcus while managing his son's complex medical needs. HIV treatment for children requires strict medication adherence, regular monitoring, and psychological support to address both the physical and emotional trauma of infection. Marcus would need lifelong medical care, with associated costs that David's insurance and modest income couldn't fully cover. The broader medical community used Marcus's case to highlight the importance of HIV disclosure laws and the protection of vulnerable populations from intentional transmission. UNAIDS and medical experts emphasized that criminal prosecution should be limited to cases involving intentional transmission with knowledge of HIV status and intent to harm. Rebecca's case met these criteria clearly, providing legal precedent for similar prosecutions. Marcus's long-term prognosis remains uncertain. While HIV treatment has advanced dramatically in recent decades, pediatric infection carries unique challenges that adult patients don't face. His immune system, still developing when he was infected, may never fully recover its normal function. The psychological trauma of betrayal by a trusted caregiver will require years of specialized therapy and support. The case sparked national conversations about the screening of potential guardians and adoptive parents, though legal experts noted the difficulty of preventing such crimes through background checks alone. Rebecca had no criminal history and excellent professional references when she entered Marcus's life. Her ability to deceive everyone who knew her highlighted the sophisticated nature of predatory behavior and the challenges facing child protection systems. The story of Marcus Thompson and Rebecca Collins forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of trust, family, and the people we allow into our most intimate spaces. This was not a crime committed by a stranger who broke into a home or approached a child on a playground. This was a betrayal, orchestrated by someone who had been welcomed, trusted, and given legal authority over a vulnerable child's welfare. Rebecca's actions were made possible by our natural inclination to trust those who present themselves as loving caregivers. Her nursing background provided credibility, her apparent devotion to Marcus created community admiration, and her legal status as his adoptive mother gave her unquestioned access to her victim. Every system designed to protect children, medical, legal, educational, and social, was manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit the trust those systems require to function. The case raises questions that extend far beyond Marcus's individual tragedy. How many other children are suffering abuse from trusted caregivers who have learned to hide their crimes behind facades of love and care? How many predators are using their professional credentials, family relationships, or community standing to access and victimize children? How can we balance the need to protect children with the recognition that most caregivers are genuinely loving and safe? Marcus Thompson, now 14, continues to fight both HIV and the psychological trauma inflicted by someone he called Mom. His story serves as a reminder that the greatest threats to children often come not from strangers, but from those who know exactly how to gain our trust and exploit our vulnerabilities. His courage in surviving and eventually speaking about his experience has helped other young victims understand that they are not alone and that healing, while difficult, is possible. Sometimes the greatest threats are not strangers in the dark, but the people we trust most. They sit at our dinner tables, they know how we like our coffee, they hold our hands when we're scared. They know our routines, our fears, our hopes for our children, and sometimes they use that knowledge not to protect, but to destroy. What would you have done if you were Marcus's father? Could this tragedy have been prevented? These are questions without easy answers, but they are questions we must ask if we hope to protect other children from similar betrayals. The evil that destroyed Marcus's childhood didn't announce itself with obvious warning signs or dramatic red flags. It came wrapped in kindness, professional competence, and apparent love. It came from someone who legally promised to protect him and instead chose to destroy him. This is the kind of evil that challenges our faith in humanity while simultaneously demanding that we remain vigilant without becoming paralyzed by suspicion. If this case shocked you, if it made you think differently about trust and family and the protection of children, then Marcus's suffering will have served a purpose beyond his own healing. Subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation, where a husband's double life led to the most unexpected murder twist in criminal history. Because the truth is, the monsters don't just lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they're the ones tucking us in at night.